stealthy hunters, scholarly tinkerers, and persuasive skalds. Those are just a few of the characters that you can play in the world of Myth Tales of Legend. Hi, my name is Ross Watson. I'm the lead designer of Myth Tales of Legend.
And I'm J.M. Defoggi, and I'm the lead writer of Myth Tales of Legend.
We are still doing this from our homes because of the quarantine, so please forgive the production values. As you can see, I've got my radio headphones on today because of that. But today's episode is going to be all about, what's going to be about today, Jam?
We're going to be talking about character creation. We're going to pick up from last week and go into part 2 of what options are available in Myth Tales of Legend and how we build a character.
Right. Also, we have some comments from last week. We had some really great people that, put their comments on the video. We do read those, and we are responding to them like in the very beginning part, so you know that we're watching. So, Jam, tell us about the first set of comments.
So, Dan Gillis had some questions. The first one was, do you see shape-shifting as voluntarily or an event-specific link? I'm assuming this is for the Lucanine. Do you see any inherent bonuses under the amount of light showing from Lunan Canaan? And I think in our discussions, the shape-shifting nature of the Lucanine is very rare. It is more the exception than the rule. We actually only have, at this point, one NPC that is able to shapeshift. They are sort of their natural form is sort of the wolfman or wolfwoman form. So what about you, Ross? Any thoughts on shapeshifting?
Well, yeah, this is from our episode on the Lucanine, which was, I think, episode 3 or 4. And well, his question is is the shapeshifting voluntary or is it triggered by the moon? You're more of an expert on this than me, but I would have to guess. I would have to say, from my designer brain, I would say it's probably both. It's voluntary, you can do it, but it can also be influenced by the moon.
And that's if they are able to shapeshift.
Right, we're talking about those who can.
Yeah.
Is it voluntary or is it triggered? I think it's kind of both. It's yes, they do it when they want to, but they also can be influenced by the moon. Maybe the moon makes it easier or harder when it's a new moon. So inherent bonuses. I don't know. What do you think?
So I guess so for me, I always start with the story and then try and figure out how the mechanics would be affected by that. And if they are abandoned by Lunan Canaan and they feel abandoned, right, because of everything we talked about in that episode, if they can shapeshift, do they see it as a curse or a benefit from or a blessing from their goddess? And if they see it as a blessing, then I could definitely see some bonuses depending on what phase Lunan Canaan is in. If it's a curse, I would actually go the opposite way and say the fuller the moon, the more bestial the effects of that influence is. It's harder to control yourself because it's more of a curse in full effect as opposed to a blessing.
I actually like that a little bit better, the curse side. Yeah. The second question Dan Gillis has is, do you anticipate awarding different clans or tribes, I think they're clans, a different bonus to create flavor and distinctness between them or even rivalry?
Yeah, like 100%. Especially when we get into expanding the threats outside of kind of the core book, and when we get to if we get to the point where we're looking at them as playable species, yes, 100%. I think that is a great way to develop culture in the species without kind of saying, well, these are different variants of the species. The Lucanine are one people. They may have some cultural variations in there, just like we provided cultural variations for the dwarves and the humans and the Four Kingdoms and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. The last question from Dan Gillis is, how many books do you feel will be part of the whole Tales of Legend release? We don't know yet. I mean, there's there's going to be, well, we have different waves of books planned, right? And wave 1 has been planned out. We know how many books are in that. We're not ready to talk about all of those things yet, but we have an idea of what wave 1 will be. Is there a plan for all of the waves forever and ever? No. I mean, we have no idea. It depends on how successful and popular the game is.
The more popular the game, the more books, right? That's sort of...
Yeah, but it's not just one book. Let me be really clear about that. It's not just one book. There's multiple books. And we will have more to say on each individual product later on. We're still very early days. And yeah, that's really about it. Wild Verfler had a question in the chat from the character creation episode. JM, what's the question?
So the question is, how does character advancement work? Is it going to be linear? Is it going to be exponential? I would turn this over to you, Ross. You designed the character advancement rules. So,
if I understand the question correctly, there are some games where the higher a rating you buy in something, the more it costs. I believe like Old White Wolf was like this, and I think Shadowrun was like this. If you wanted to go from 1 to 2, that was a certain amount of points. And if you wanted to go from 2 to 3, that would be even more points, and it would just keep the cost would keep growing over time. Well, to be really to talk about that, I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, Myth Tales of Legend does not have an exponential costs. You pay the same amount to bump up when you spend to increase. But however, to be really clear, there are limits on how high you can go, and those are actually based on your rank, your character rank, which is kind of like a level. So you're not going to be able to have like crazy stats at rank 1. You're going to have to level up and then be able to purchase the higher attributes and skills and things of that nature. So attributes do cost more to increase than skills, and talents cost more than attributes. But again, that cost does not just grow over time. We will get into this in more detail in the future, but I hope that answers your question, Wild Verfler.
Well, and if he's talking more about, say, kind of the F20 linear fighters versus exponential wizards, I think we've got a pretty flat growth for characters over the ranks in Myth. I don't know if that's helpful at all either, but
well, if you have more questions about it, or if we did answer the question, please let us know in the comments.
Yeah.
But let's move on. Let's actually talk about character creation part 2.
Part 2.
Yes, part 2. Today is we're going to start with talking about these skills. Last episode we covered the attributes and traits. This episode we're going to start with skills. Skills, just like attributes and traits, they have a rating, and that rating indicates that you have some training in the skill, and it usually goes from 1 to 6. Now, JM, can we use all of our skills without training?
Most can be used without trainings, but there are, I mean, like most games, there are things that are so specialized that unless you are trained in them, right? If you are not trained in spellcasting, you don't have the ability to sort of reach beyond yourself and affect the supernatural or have prayers answered, or if you are not trained in the skills of artifice and tinkering, you're sort of out of luck there.
Right.
They're restricted because of knowledge.
And those skills are generally limited to a particular archetype. Like if you don't have the right archetype, even if you learn the skill, like you can't cast a spell if you're not an apprentice.
Right. You may have like theoretical knowledge, but you have no practical invocation knowledge. Yeah.
Exactly. So yes, most skills can be used untrained. We have a thing called the Tree of Learning.
Now that's where you hang your character for 7 days upside down, and you got to let it percolate for a while, and remove one of your character's eyes. But that
contemplate this on the Tree of Learning.
Contemplate this on the Tree of
Learning. So the Tree of Learning, all this really means is that we want characters to have a foundation of skills. Like you can't just say, I'm going to take fighting at max rank and shooting at max rank and call it a day. That's not how this game works. You have to have a broader selection of skills. The way the tree of learning works is really simple. You have to have been trained in a number of skills equal to the rating of your highest skill. So if you want to have a rating 4 in stealth, you have to have trained in at least 4 skills. Mm-hmm. Pretty simple, but it does at least require you to have a breadth of knowledge as opposed to just being like, I know how to swing a sword, roar. Now, you can still be a character who has a special, that you've chosen to specialize in a particular thing. That's still allowed. It's just, you will have to have a slight bit of a spread amongst the other things.
So let me ask you this, Ross. You've made a bunch of pre-gens for the quick start.
Yes.
How many skills? How many skills do you look at the average character is going to possess?
Well, I mean, an average starting character, let's say,
just right out of the gate.
I think I would say probably 4 or 5.
Okay.
Yeah, our pre-gens. Let me just do a quick count here. Yeah, 5. 5 is what we have in the pre-gens. So, yeah.
So we have 17 skills, and you're going to be trained. You're going to have training at start in about a third of them. All right.
Depends. I mean, if characters can, of course, spread themselves out, or choose to bring it in a little bit, but that's generally the way that you're gonna end up with. So GM, we talked about attributes in the last episode. Mm-hmm. How do attributes and skills work together?
Well, so each skill has a linked attribute. Now, I do like that we've kind of said in the same way that I look to Fading Suns, where there's a linked attribute to the skill, but if the GM really wants to have you say, well, what do you know about swords? Not just how do you swing a sword? You could link it to a different attribute if you wanted, if it works for the scene. But that's what builds your die pool. You're going to take your rating in your attribute and your rating in the skill and add those together. And that's how many dice you're going to roll for to test that skill.
Right. So say, for example, athletics is linked to strength. So most of the time you're rolling strength plus athletics. But if a situation came up where you're like, listen, I think if the GM was like, maybe this is more of an agility thing, you're like, cool, I'll take my agility and my athletics skill and combine those to make the dice pool.
Yeah.
It's going to, there's a default, but then the GM has the right to say it's going to be different.
Yeah. Or if you're trying to impress a crowd by lifting things up and putting them, no. Charisma plus athletics. Who knows? Your GM is the rule at the table.
If you can make a compelling enough argument, who knows? So the first skill we'll talk about is athletics, and athletics is essentially anything that you kind of do with your body. Do you want to lift something heavy? Do you want to swim? Do you want to climb? Do you want to jump over something? Athletics, which is why it's linked to strength.
So then we have cunning. And so, Ross, what is our cunning skill sort of encapsulate?
Cunning is your knowledge of things that are illegal, basically. This is your streetwise. This is your ability to sort of suss out where you can find illicit goods or services or things of that nature. Rumors.
It's more of a charisma-based skill application than, say, like the lock picking, the pickpockets sort of. Okay.
Yes, I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a fence.
That's right.
That would be a cunning test.
Yeah, kind of. I know where in the city to go get X.
For example.
Yeah.
Which is linked to the next skill.
Right. The next skill is deception, and that is how to deceive people and craft tales, and also I would assume we would roll disguise into this as well. Like anytime you are actively trying to present something false as truth, you're going to go to your deception skill.
Yes. Also great for bluffing in combat.
Mm-hmm. For interaction attacks, yeah.
Interaction attacks, yeah. When we talk about those things later, deception's an important thing in there. And then there's fighting.
And that covers basically any melee that you would be doing.
anything that's involves you hitting someone with yourself or a weapon is a fighting test. Fighting is connected to strength, but there are some weapons that are like daggers or rapiers that instead use your agility.
If you're playing a monk, you could also have your fists be an agility weapon.
Correct.
Yeah. Kind of in opposition to the fight skill, we have a healing skill. That's the after the fight is over, putting people back together. If
pretty
fight
much.
is taking them apart, healing is pulling them back together.
Treating wounds, treating injuries, treating toxins. That's how you will learn to deal with that. Healing, I mean, could be in other circumstances, could be something like, I want to see how this guy died if you're examining a body. But for the most part, it's for patching people up.
Yep. Insight.
Yes.
Is this person lying to me? What's their emotional state? What can I gather from the people in the scene, not necessarily from the objects or the locations of the scene themselves. This is what is my character, what's my read of other people's skill.
Absolutely. Reading intentions, reading reactions. That's what insight is good for. Again, very useful in investigations or if you're a face.
Yep.
Always handy to have.
After that, we have intimidation, which I mean is sort of a ubiquitous skill in RPGs, but this also can tie into interaction attacks when we get there. So it's not just a tell me what you know or else, but there's also this ability in combat to threaten and cow your opponents and getting them to back down. I also see intimidation for the pupil, that classic scene where the pupil just puts his hand on the sword, on his or her sword, and the bandits back down because they know that if we go one step further, this is going to escalate to violence. And so
with the pupil, I mean, or the pupil would just totally be like the thumb pushes the blade out like 2 inches.
Just that little bit.
So the light glints on the razor. Yeah, that's beautiful. After intimidation, we have investigation, which is an intellect skill. Investigation is how you research things, you learn things from a scene or a library, or anytime you are able to research a thing, that's where investigation comes into play. It is you can also use this for things like I'm going to search for a hidden entrance in the tomb. That kind of thing. Again, most of the time what this is for is more scholarly pursuits.
Yeah. It's more of your intentional. It's more intentional than sort of perception, which kind of ends up being more like awareness or what do I take in. But after investigation kind of tied into that, we have knowledge. That's our what does your character know skill. As we mentioned, elves get bonus to knowledge checks because of their song lore. Do we have any sort of specializations with knowledge, or is it just our knowledge skill?
Well, knowledge is kind of a general thing. It is what you remember, is what you understand. The idea of your background, which we're getting into later, is going to kind of cover those specializations. It's going to give you a little bit more information and context about the individual things that you might have a better grasp on. But this is kind of a general measure of your learning, your ability to recall information, legends, trivia, historical lore, that kind of thing. Any information you've absorbed. The difficulty for a knowledge test is just like how hard it is to remember, or, and a failure may just indicate your character's never heard of it before, which is entirely possible. I actually kind of sometimes enjoy a character who fails a lot of knowledge rolls.
Right. I tend to, some of my favorite gaming moments are those early levels where PCs fail a knowledge roll and I establish something that they believe to be true that is at complete odds with. I remember one where they were going into a dungeon and the gnome was like, "What do I know about kobolds?" Natural one. I'm like, "You know that kobolds eat gnome babies," and so he freaked out for the rest of the campaign because he was convinced that the kobolds were coming for him.
Right. Perception is a skill that is you roll that a lot to see what you can notice.
Mm-hmm.
If you can detect something hidden, if you can identify a thing at a distance. Anytime you try to sense or learn more about something you can perceive, that is where perception comes into play.
Now, perception is one of the few exceptions in our mechanics where it doesn't roll a campfire die. So, why is that?
Well, honestly, this came from playtesting. We just the more we gamed with the system, with Campfire system, the more that complications and exalted the complications and the Campfire die exalted success, it was like, why? How is this? It was very difficult to contextualize seeing something and then that being a complication. It was just easier. And again, perception is one of those rolls you just roll a lot of during the game. So the Campfire die, the purpose of the Campfire die is to add something interesting or dramatic to the scene. And when you're perceiving, you're already doing that. Mm-hmm. You're already adding knowledge and information. So it just doesn't make sense with that particular skill. Everything else, the Campfire dice is, you could probably find a way to make that really cool and interesting. Perception, it's just too common.
Right, and it already does the thing. Yeah. Okay.
It already does the thing. Which leads us to
persuasion.
Change my mind. Change
your mind on it. Yeah. So persuasion is in one way the right hand, if you will, where intimidation is the left hand. It is the changing the mind or getting something out of people through pleasant means, pleasant social interaction, whereas intimidation is sort of getting information or changing the mind through unpleasant social interaction. And then sort of after that, we have shooting, which is the companion to fighting, but at a distance.
Anytime you attack someone at range, unless it's a spell, you use shooting.
Now, does that include thrown weapons as well?
Yeah. Cool. Anytime you're attacking someone at range, it's shooting.
All right. So then next we have,
after shooting, Sleight of Hand, which this is a very thiefly ability. This is picking pockets, picking locks, pulling things out of your sleeve. Sleight of Hand is a very useful, way for a brigand especially. Mm-hmm. It's a very useful way to sort of interact with challenges that you may find along your adventures. Right. You can also entertain children by pulling coins out of their ears.
That's right. It's your palming skill. It's
yes.
If you want to cheat at cards, it's that's another way to use that. Now,
absolutely.
Next, we have spellcasting, and what I like is the simplicity of having the spellcasting skill, but it is tied to different attributes depending on which archetype you pick. So we've made one skill just to represent so that there's not, the skill list isn't 20 skills long. You have spellcasting. Anytime you're trying to use your will or magical powers to supernaturally influence the world, but acolytes use it differently than apprentices.
Right, and there's trappings as well, which are the things you have to do to cast a spell, and we'll get into that when we talk about spellcasting. But so the way you cast a spell is differentiated by multiple things, but amongst one of the things you do is which attribute you use, and that is pretty locked in. It's locked in based on the type of magic that you use. Acolytes channel the power of the gods, therefore will is their attribute. Apprentices use their power, their personality, so charisma is their attribute. Yeah, I mean, that's really all there is to say about that. You cast spells with spellcasting. Anytime you're casting a spell, that's the skill you use.
Right. Then we have sort of the brigand's favorite skill, stealth. And we have, we'll probably get into this as its own section when we talk about combat, but there are some pretty unique and interesting stealth rules for when you want to use it in combat. But this is I don't want to have what I am doing being noticed, whether that is quietly moving across a courtyard or, using the trees not to be seen as you set up an ambush. Stealth is one of those, again, sort of ever-present tropes in fantasy RPGs. You want to be like, if you can't be seen, you can't be hurt.
Stealth.
Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and stealth goes with the brigands' abilities very well, because the brigands sort of they do a lot of their archetype abilities key off of not being noticed or being having the attention on someone else while they're doing something. So,
I mean, you could argue that a lot of archetypes would get a benefit out of this. Archers and hunters. Mm-hmm. I can see a great sneaky soldier. Anyway, stealth. The thing I was going to mention is that stealth and sleight of hand are actually both opposed by perception. So when you are trying to be stealthy, or when you're trying to pick someone's pocket, generally speaking, your difficulty number is going to be their passive perception, which is half of whatever your normal value in this skill is. That's a trait that is on your character sheet. If you're like, I am watching this guy's hands, right? Like you're like, I am paying close attention. Now the difficulty number is actually, it's an opposed roll, where both of you roll and compare your successes. So it's just realize that like there are difficulty numbers that exist in the world for every one of these skill tests. But on stealth and sleight of hand, it's just a little bit more focused, because those things are based on whether or not you see them or notice them or sense them in some way.
Yeah.
And then there's survival. Can you find shelter, food in the wilderness? Can you track an animal in the wilderness? Anytime you are out of doors and trying to do a thing, it's generally going to be related to survival. That's like, what's the weather going to be like today? Make a survival test.
Yeah. Can I eat
which
that?
way is north? Can I eat that? Yeah. Those are all good questions for someone who has been trained in survival.
Yes.
You can use survival untrained, just it's way better if you have trained.
And then we're rounding out our skill list is tinkering, which is sort of our engineer skill. Like if you are working with, if you are a trickster, if you are working with machines of any sort, this is the skill that you're going to use to understand what it's doing, to replicate it, to fix it, to take it apart.
Yeah. Anything more complex than, say, a medieval level is where tinkering comes into play. And there are clockwork beings called tic-tocs. There are devices and suits and steam-powered engines. There are things like that exist in the world of math. They're not super common, but they're out there. And if you want to be able to understand, interact with, repair, or manipulate, that's where tinkering the skill would come into play. You're like, this lock has got 15 gears, says the brigand. I can't pick this.
Yeah.
It's some kind of Baroque Victorian nightmare of gears and ticking, metronomes. And the guy who has the tinkering skill is like, aha, I can help.
I can do this. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So tinkering, that's going to be kind of like survival. Like survival only really comes into play when you're outdoors or doing stuff in the wilderness. Tinkering comes into play only when you're really dealing with that kind of technology, which is, again, not everywhere, but it's a specialized skill. This is the one you cannot use untrained. It's a specialized skill that can be incredibly useful. It can be clutch if you're in the right circumstance. So tinkerers are a very valuable member of any hero team.
So that ends skills.
Yes.
And then but that's not it for character creation. Like we have talents, and these are really powerful abilities that sort of set your character apart. Now you don't unless you're a human, you don't start with a talent, correct?
Yeah. No, you can buy one as part of character creation. This is something you can do, but humans just start. They have one, and your maximum number is limited. You can only have a number of talents equal to your rank plus one. So you'll only ever have, if you go through this game and play it for, a year, 6 months, a year, and you get to rank 5, you're only ever going to possibly have 6 talents. And even then, talents are the most expensive thing to buy. Right. So they're cool and powerful and flavorful, and that's why they cost so much.
Now, if you were building your character and you're a human, you could start with 2 if you chose to purchase that. Okay. So
you'd be a little behind everybody else in terms of your attributes and skills, but yeah.
Well, do you want to give us some of our example talents?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's really too many of them to list.
Right.
All of them. But we'll cover a couple that we have here. One is called Shifty, and a Shifty character his crafty ways often get him out of trouble. Remember, we were talking about what Cunning does. Well, with Shifty, the talent, you can substitute your Cunning dice pool for the next skill test that you make. You have to take a short or long respite before you can use it again. But that means, roughly at least once an encounter, you can be like, I don't know, maybe you're that brigand and you're facing that weird clockwork lock and you're like, man, but your Cunning is really high. You're like, okay, because I'm Shifty, and a sneaky son of a gun, I'm going to use my Cunning, and that way I'll have way more dice to tackle this problem. And it just kind of represents your character being a very sneaky kind of guy who has lots of little underworld contacts and connections and things of that nature. What's another one?
Another one that we have is swift spell casting. So this allows you to cast a spell as a simple action. Normally that's your primary action in combat. Now when you do this, you do suffer shock. You're channeling too much too quickly. But you get to cast a spell as a simple action, which, Ross, am I interpreting this correctly? That would let you one round cast 2 spells. That's huge. But again, you can only do this once per respite before you have to take that rest and then kind of recover from, over channeling yourself and then can do it again.
Right. And honestly, that shock is, that could actually be a thing where you knock yourself out.
Yeah.
Like, because you can, of course, you suffer shock as well when you get a complication on a spellcasting.
Mm-hmm.
So potentially you could suffer some pretty severe shock using this talent. So be careful.
Yes.
Well, and if you're an apprentice and you're using the charring as well.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nova. Wow.
You could go out and literally burn yourself to a cinder. Right. In one epic outpouring of power, which could be a cool way to go. Just going to say.
Right. Just hope the dice don't screw you, because that would be the worst. Like, I use all this stuff. Oh, and I miss. But yeah, those are a couple examples of talents. They're important, powerful things that can give your character a flavor or a special thing that only they can do. It's to set them apart. And then the next part we can talk about is backgrounds.
Right.
These are things that you did before you were a hero. There's 4 main backgrounds you can choose from, and each one has subtypes that help flesh it out. And the goal is that you work with your GM to tailor your pick of a background to your character story. Now, a background isn't just like a concept or an idea. There is a mechanical benefit attached to it. JM, let's talk about some of those backgrounds.
So the first background is your origin. So you'll work with the GM trying to figure out what region or location you came from in the world of myth, and why growing up there has given you +1 vitality. So you're saying, I am from Blackwall, and because we're under siege from the wasteland of the Risen, we're just hardier folk. But it sort of applies. Like if you pick origin, that's kind of where you're going. But you get to define why you are hardier than, say, someone who picks one of the other backgrounds. Do you want to go with accomplishment? Tell us what that one is.
Well, I mean, let's stick with origin for a second. So this is a good example of where that knowledge skill would come into play, right? Mm-hmm. You could say, well, because I'm from Blackwall, and this is a knowledge test involving the unholy, right? I should get maybe I know more about this than a regular person. And the GM be like, okay, I'll give you an extra die or an extra shift or whatever. There could be some kind of benefit that comes along with that.
Some sort of narrative, and that's one of the things you want. Like, the background is there as as a narrative tool for you to tell the GM, hey, in this situation, because of my background, here's why I would know a bit more, do a little bit better, have this bonus.
Right. And, let's be clear. Everyone's from somewhere.
Right.
But people who take the origin as a background, that defines kind of who they are. We all know people who are like, maybe there's a friend you have who's from Boston, but there's people who are like, no, I'm a Bostonian.
Yes.
Right. That's who they are.
Right.
Or like for me, I could say I'm from Texas, but I wouldn't say I'm a Texan.
Right.
Right. Because that's not part of my identity. So the origin one is like the guy saying, no, I'm a Bostonian, or I'm a Texan, or I'm, in your case, I am a Blackwaller.
Yes.
I come from Blackwall. And that means something important to them. And that's why as an origin, the identity, kind of comes through. Mm-hmm. Yes, it also means you're hardier. You're harder to kill. I like to think of that as like you can't put a Blackwaller down that easy. Right. That's the way I like to think about it. So tell us why don't you tell us about the next one?
So basically, accomplishment is great. You get to define something that you did that was amazing before the campaign started. And it's so amazing that you gain a title for it. I'm reading through a land fit for heroes right now by he's the guy who wrote Altered Carbon. It's his fantasy series. And there are several people who at the start of the story are known as Dragonbane. Well, that has a very specific connotation, and you know that this is not just a regular guy. At some point in the past, they fought and killed a dragon, and that sort of puts in context kind of immediately what you should expect from this character. Sort of the same way here, instead of getting a title at the end of a session or at the end of a story, you start off with one that defines your character and most likely is going to evolve from that point on. And we talked about titles last week, but in case someone's new to this, what benefit does a title give you, Ross?
Well, I'm not actually sure we have talked about titles yet.
Oh, well then let's talk about titles.
Well, very briefly, a title is an epithet that is attached to your character, and you can get a bonus die once per scene if you can link your title to what you're trying to do. Like if you are Ileana the Swift being your title, and once per scene you're like, I really want to catch that falling idol before it hits the floor, and the GM's like, okay, make an agility roll. You're like, because I'm Ileana the Swift and I have the fastest reactions, mm-hmm. I should get a bonus. The game master's like, cool, there's your +1, and you get to use your title. Titles can evolve. You can actually change them if everyone. You have to have a group consensus, but mm-hmm. if the group consensus is like, yeah, you're not that person, you're not the Swift anymore, you're the Dragonbane or whatever.
Yeah.
You can change that title, and you can earn titles during play. But mm-hmm. accomplishment is the one way you can start with one, and by doing this, it does, as you said, JM, it kind of defines who you are a little bit.
Mm-hmm. In the same way that origin, if you said I'm a Blackwaller and that was the core, one of the core pillars of your identity, accomplishment is the same thing. It is one of these core pillars of you are telling everyone at the table, this is something important to my character.
Right. Like, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something great. Like it can actually be something tragic. Mm-hmm. It can even be something a little bit dark that follows you around. Like you could be Tovan the soldier, or you could be Tovan the Black Prince of Canis.
Yeah. And
all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, like that's a little more dangerous sounding. That's a little more, maybe that's not a good title, but it's a useful title. Like you can still do things with that title that are important and cool. And again, it helps form part of who your character is.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of making a character who has a title that is given to him or that he has, but is not true. Like if you were playing, Jara, the betrayer of Three Rivers, you're actually trying to work your way. Like, my character did not do that. She is trying to work her way out from this. But that doesn't mean that when you come to a town and people are like, oh, it's Jara the Betrayer, crap, now I have to deal with this. Or you could even leverage that. Do you know who I am? Even if you don't even if you're trying to outlive it, saying that I am Jara, the betrayer of Three Rivers, that imparts that bonus die because people titles are known.
Yeah. What is your personal title? You are JM.
What would I call myself?
Yeah, JM the GM?
JM the GM is one that I use always when I introduce the streams on Ulysses, so I'll go with that one.
Cool. I'm going to pick dibs on the Black Prince of Canis.
There you go. I say that's a great one. Yeah.
So that's accomplishment.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the next one.
So the next one is goal. So that is, you have something that you really want to accomplish. So it could evolve into a title at the end of a session, but maybe your goal is, this dragon destroyed this dwarven hold that I am from, and my goal is to kill Zenithor the Green. That is my driving goal. And it's, again, one of those things, each of these backgrounds, when you come to the table, the GM is going to go, cool, what are your backgrounds? Excellent. I have 4 story ideas that you have just all handed me on a plate.
Right.
Because you're saying, this is what's important to my character. Please make the story about this. And so in addition to everything we've talked about, that kind of is true about all the backgrounds, the mechanical benefit to this background is you get a campfire point. Now, this is not just a starting campfire point, right?
You get a bonus. You get a bonus. Yeah. So at the beginning of the game, everybody gets a certain amount of campfire points. You get an extra because you're pursuing that goal.
Right. Which is cool, because that's sort of one of the ways that when you make a roll and the dice betray you, the campfire point is the way you go, yeah, but see, you're remembering it wrong. Actually, let me pick up these traders and...
Yes. Your goal is your driving ambition. It's you want to do a thing. And I love the idea of tracking down a dragon. That's the thing I want to do. Or find my lost father, or locate the missing sword of some hero.
Right. Get to the heart of the knot.
Yeah. So this, as you say, it's perfect for the GM who's like, I know what your story is.
That's
now, right? And but goals can, like titles, goals can evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you accomplish that goal, you're not anymore like, oh well, now I'm done. No, there's a next thing. There's usually some next thing for you to do. But maybe actually that emptiness could be an interesting story beat. Just it wouldn't be forever.
Right. Yeah. What do you do when you've accomplished what has been your life's driving purpose?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that's cool. And then the last one.
So it's connection. So this is, you are defining yourself by your relationship to someone else in the world. You are telling the GM this relationship, whether it's antagonistic, whether it's beneficial, whether it's rivalrous, this is important to my character. I want my character story to be about this relationship. And so you have a close connection with a person or a group, and we're going to actually talk about one of the main groups in Myth, Tales of Legend in our next episode, so tune in. Or that can assist you. So you can send and receive messages from this contact. Once per session, you can call on a favor or a service or a benefit or a boon of some sort because, hey, wait, I have this close relationship with this person or organization. We really need invitations to get into this party. I know a guy. They'll come through for me. But on the flip side, as a GM, I would go, cool, you have this connection. Hey, by the way, at the start of this adventure, they come and ask for something now. Oh,
I love that.
Wait, this works both ways, does it?
Yeah. And this could be a mentor. It could be like your Obi-Wan, right? You see the guy that's taught you all of your your skills. It could be a group. It could be like, the Bibliosoft and I, we're tight. And from time to time, I can ask one of their agents for a thing. It can be. I love your idea of it could be a rival.
Yeah.
It could be somebody you're maybe someone you're blackmailing, do this or I'll expose you. kind of thing. There could be all kinds of little nuances to how this connection works. But it is a defining feature of your character. Your Mr. Miyagi to your, Daniel-san.
Yeah.
You need to decide, how this person interacts, or this group interacts with you. But they are a big feature in your character's life, and that's why it's a background. So these are just some ways to help flesh out who your character is, and we have covered that pretty exhaustively.
Yeah, we're sitting here at 3/4 of an hour, just talking about the second half of how much we enjoy character creation. And I hope if you are listening from the far future and you have a copy of Myths, Tales of Legend in your hands, I hope you got a lot of inspiration from this video, especially about backgrounds and how to use skills, and yeah.
There's even more. Like, we will probably have a part 3.
Yes.
But for now, I think we should just say, make sure to go check out the other shows that are on the Ulysses International channel. I know that there is a live play of some solo adventures for the Dark Eye, and there is at least one about Myth, the Dawn of Heroes.
Yep.
And of course, JM is running 2 streaming games.
Yes, we have our Annals of Antioch, which they just got off the planet last night, and are headed towards the pirate ship that got them into this whole thing, as it's in a decaying orbit. So we'll have to see how that turns out. And on Tuesday nights, we just launched I would say a short Torg campaign, but I thought Annals of Antioch was going to be short, and we just wrapped up session 9 of that. So this will be our Torg campaign for while we're in quarantine. We've got a great group of characters. Ross has joined us on that. So we have Ross is playing a pulp hero from the Nile Empire. Mark is playing a member of the race from Tharcold. He's playing a Tharcold scion. Maddie from the Oh Boy Fading Suns game has joined us, and she is playing essentially a smuggler from the cyber papacy, she gets people in and out of the cyber papacy, kind of under the radar of the Godnet. And then Lily is playing our monster hunter from Arosh. And so we did episode 0. If you've ever been curious about Torg, we covered the rules, the setting, and character creation in one episode, and we're going to start on Tuesday.
Awesome. Once again, we want to say thanks for supporting our channel and checking out our show. Please be sure to leave a comment if you have anything to say or anything you'd like us to cover in the future. We do read those, we do respond to those, and we do really appreciate people who are engaging with us on the various topics we discuss. And until next time.
Yeah, keep telling stories.